Good afternoon and welcome to Philanthropy Impact's Walking My Shoes series for professional advisors. This is a series of concise but informative sessions designed to help you navigate the philanthropy and impact investment space and are part of our core mission to increase and improve philanthropy and social investment and to also encourage impact investing. As this is a strictly 30-minute session, it will go very quickly. However, we do really encourage audience interaction. So please do use the chat to introduce yourselves, to have your say and pose questions to our panel. Please make sure to select panel and all attendees when posting in the chat so that everyone can see. Today, our expert panel will be discussing the refugee crisis and how professional advisors can play a part in unlocking more funding to the sector. Quick thank you to John Pepin, our CEO, for chairing today's session. And joining John, we welcome Sara Llewellin, Chief Executive of Barrow Cadbury Trust, Paddy Walker, who's Managing Director of Llewellin Group, and Rebecca La-Touche, Head of Philanthropy at International Rescue Committee. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us today and for sharing your experiences. I'll now hand over to John to make a start. Thank you, John.
Well, thank you, Sophia. I would like to start off with each of you asking who you are, your interest in refugees, what role you play, and your journey. So starting off with Rebecca, who are you?
Hi, John, and thanks so much for inviting me to be a part of this panel today. I'm delighted that Philanthropy Impact are taking the time and to talk about this really important issue. So in brief, I'm the head of philanthropy for IRC in the UK. I came to humanitarian work because I had a passion for social change, and it's a real privilege to work with the philanthropists and partners that we do at the IRC to bring change to people whose lives and livelihoods have been absolutely shattered by conflict and disaster. That's me.
And then the International Rescue Committee, who are they?
The IRC, International Rescue Committee, are a leading global humanitarian organisation who responds to the world's worst humanitarian crises, helping people to survive, recover and gain control of their future. And we work in 35 or so countries, including in the UK, but spanning from Latin America to the Middle East, Africa and in Asia.
Yeah, Sara, give me a bit of sense of your background and what Barrow Cadbury Trust is doing in this area, please.
Thanks, John, and thanks for having me. Afternoon all. We're a philanthropic foundation, still majority family governed by the Cadbury family. And one of our programs of work is in migration, which is the sort of current decade or so's iteration of our racial justice commitment, or one of them. And we work particularly in policy advocacy, campaigning, voice and public discourse, so very rarely in direct service provision, apart from last year when we delivered 5 million at breakneck speed for the National Lottery Community Fund into smaller refugee and migrant organisations across England. So that was a very interesting journey. And we are also very active in social and responsible investing and shareholder activism. And so we have some in our social investment portfolio organisations working in the migrant and refugee sector.
Thank you. Paddy, what's your background? What's your interest in this whole area?
So my name is Paddy Walker. I have done for nearly 30 years, a family office based up in Hampstead, fifth generation refugee family, actually. So my father-in-law came from sort of Latvia, Poland, or his family did after some pogrom in the 1890s. And my mother-in-law came out of Budapest in 1956, which was only 65 years ago. So one of our workflows too is human rights and advocacy, sort of similar to Sara around that refugee advocacy. We like that advocacy piece. We're able to take risks. It's more difficult to fund, we find generally. It reflects the family's views. And tangentially, we have we tend to move around that. So I co-chair Human Rights Watch here in the UK. So that's obviously all over this piece, and we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. And Tanya, my wife, is a trustee of the Prince's Trust, so sort of similarly involved in this piece.
So why is it that your organization picked this as a particular area to work in. What's been your journey, Paddy?
As I say, sort of tangential, we have lots of workflows, but because that's sort of relevant and it resonates with the family, and an example for us, our journey is we've just sponsored at the Imperial War Museum. It's on at the moment. If you need a day out, go there now. So their Refugee Forced to Flee exhibition. And that is interesting for us because it's the family perspective of the flight decision. So, you know, how, when, where, what actually the empirics of doing that. And so that's sort of part of our journey. And what we try to do there is we're trying to publicize that issue, to do it in a slightly soft way, because obviously it's a tricky decision, and also to bring in, so use that as a platform to bring in other charities like Human Rights Watch to have their part in that exhibition. Air Wars, another charity, also contributed to the exhibition.
Okay, we've just put the link on the chat for people to see.
Excellent. www.refugeesforcedtoflee.com. I think it's good, actually.
Oh, good. All right, Rebecca, can you give us a sense of what the situation is like? So from what I gather, there's about 80 million displaced people, about 26 million who are refugees. Can you give us a sense of what the current situation is? What are some of the issues that are being faced by refugees?
Yeah, sure. And I'm afraid it's not a great one. We see the number of refugees rise year on year, to the extent where almost 1% of the world's population have been forced to flee their homes. And actually, the vast majority are now being hosted in less developed countries. So what we see is that puts a massive strain on already stretched resources. And I think another trend to add into that is the fact that displacement now lasts for up to 20 years. So wherein in the past you might have seen people displaced for maybe a couple of years and then they would return home, that length of displacement lasts a huge number of years, which means that it puts kind of ever more pressure on already stretched resources, as mentioned. I think, you know, we can't not talk about COVID, and COVID has, you know, in the UK, it's been a very powerful reminder of inequality. But we've also seen that on the global stage, and it has been those most vulnerable, particularly refugees and people living in crisis, that have been the hardest hit. And it's not just the impact of COVID itself, but it's actually the secondary and the tertiary impacts of what COVID has done in terms of restricting access to healthcare for those that need it, but also in limiting economic opportunity. To the extent where we're now critically concerned about the potential for famine in East Africa. So there's, you know, millions of people that are affected, and there's been an increase of 40% need over the last year. So it's, as I said, there's no way of painting that picture in a positive light, but I think what's great is that we're here today to talk about how we can come together to do something to change that.
So it's more broadly than a refugee issue. It's a humanitarian issue then?
It's a humanitarian issue, but you know, the things are critically linked to what causes people to flee. So people flee because they are facing crisis, they're facing conflict, but they're also because they feel like there is no other option that they have. So, you know, people don't just decide to get up and go. They're doing it because they're forced to. They don't have any other option. And I think that's where we think about the impact of economic crises, but also, you know, thinking about climate change and how the three intersect. So we released a report late last year, our emergency watch list, which is really, released annually, but we kind of talk about that intersection of conflict, of COVID and of climate change, and how that is interplaying to cause migration.
Sara, are you seeing the same thing? What do you think the future is going to look like in this? Because that was pretty negative and terrible picture that Rebecca is painting, not even mentioning individuals and what they're going through. But what is your sense?
Well, the same. I mean, that's not opinion. What Rebecca's just been telling us is known data, and obviously I agree with her entirely that the on the world stage and domestically, the COVID, the pandemic has raised very much more in the public mind the whole raft of inequalities and so forth. And I think that gives us some cause for hope. I mean, the CBI was on, you know, is now, and many other global corporate related institutions are talking about what we popularly call in the UK building back better. There's a big appetite globally now for impact investing, which is going to have huge impact, we hope, on climate change, because as Africa dries out, the faster we can mitigate climate change, the faster we can slow down some of this increasing global displacement. What we have in the UK is different to that. I mean, we have a considerable protection, but the refugee and migrant communities here have had an extremely difficult year. I mean, haven't we all? But there's things relative with violence and with accommodation, with education, with health, with gender issues, with hate crime, with all kinds of basic needs and destitution that is frankly not acceptable in an advanced democracy. So I think we have to be optimistic. I believe, along with Karl Popper, that optimism is a moral duty. But I don't think we can remotely rest on any laurels with the situation that we face, either domestically or internationally.
Thank you. Feel free to comment back and forth, and for people to put questions or comments into the chat line. Paddy, Sara mentioned impact investing. Are you seeing a move to impact investing to support dealing with issues related to refugees, and what do you see as the role of trusts and foundations in terms of their investing? So Sara's talking about using philanthropy and stuff, but also their impact investing. What's your perception of this?
Well, there's a lot to unpack on that question, John. Thank you very much for that. I'm glad we've got 3 hours. So the impact investment piece, we don't do ourselves. You know, we worry about the measurement, the impact, the efficiency of that. I'm sure it'll get better in time. We find, difficult management teams, not necessarily sort of optimum way of doing it. On the ESG front, much more sophisticated, and certainly things happening there. But I think the takeaway from what Sara absolutely rightly says is just to point to the, just the extraordinary complexity of that. And for the professional advisors listening to us today, I think it's important when communicating with their, with their cohort, with their clients, they've really got to ensure that their clients, I think, in order to get best outputs here, best outcomes, where do their clients want to come into this very complicated argument? So is it that expose and publicize bit at the top? Is it the more advocacy and pressure bit, so a little bit further down the pyramid? And the pressure, are you pressuring states or bodies or United Nations, or further down individuals or locals, third sector, regional, or whatever? So, and then advocacy, or is it service models? So Sara and I, you've heard about, really, we like that sort of the advocacy piece. But of course, you can really target this by doing the service providers. And then are you targeting it at a particular piece, or is it generalist? So I think there is a real role here for the financial professional actually to help the client unbundle and understand where they want to get their impact, because it's a very different bang for buck. You know, you can pay £30 for an advert, or you can pay £30 actually to give somebody some new shoes and a meal. So where do you want to be on that? Do you want to try and give everyone around the table, you know, you can be sure that they've all got new shoes, or do you want to have that 10% chance, blue sky, of actually putting money to work with a view to actually changing policy and changing much more that 30,000 feet piece, which is what we happen to like, but real role there for the advisors.
Okay, thank you. I completely agree around the advisors and how they can have a major impact in this area. And it's really difficult for someone who wants to be a philanthropist to actually manage through that complexity. So thank you for bringing that up. But there's a trend now with the Charter Commission doing some consultation just recently ended on responsible investment or sustainable investment, whatever term you want to use, and basically trying to clarify the rules for charities, which may mean that a lot of trusts and foundations may have to look at more impact/ESG investing. Have you been picking up on anything around that, Paddy?
Or Sara, you wanted to come in there, then I'll come back on ESG.
Okay, well, you go ahead. Come in now.
Me?
Oh,
I was just going to add to what Paddy said about, if you like, the smorgasbord, which is a way of looking at it for professional advisors, is the pathway. So there are all kinds of entry points, as well as types of giving, from before people leave their country of origin all the way through to post-resettlement support in their country of destination. And that, I think, is at the end of the day, people's giving needs to be driven by what they think is the most important, and also what they're good at, what they can do most well. You can't do advocacy and structural change work without a bit of machinery and without a lot of collaboration, which is very time consuming. So if you try and do it over the short term, it's highly wasteful. So only do that kind of work if you've got a fairly long horizon or stable trustee body.
Okay, and it is long term, which can discourage people, because it could take 20, 30, or 40 years advocating for certain things. That's right. Rebecca, back to you. So we have two philanthropists, or social investors, whatever term you want to use, on this call. You're a service deliverer. What do you see are some of the barriers, and how can you have philanthropists help you overcome those?
Yeah, happy to answer. I think I would just add, though, that IRC does do service delivery, but a very important part of our work is also the advocacy piece. The two come hand in hand, you know, I think that being able to do that across a local, national, and international space for the right organisation is really important in how we address some of these issues. In terms of some of the barriers, I think what's interesting to talk about, and this touches a bit on what Sara was saying, is that what we've experienced in tackling humanitarian issues and in the refugee crisis is a real lack of long-term funding and also a flexible funding. So what we've seen in the past, and there's been a high amount of government funding in this space, is that you get very kind of short windows of funding, which means that you might get a grant that lasts 6 to 9 months, which doesn't leave much room for long-term change, for long-term investment. And also those grants have been heavily restricted, meaning that it's very difficult to innovate, it's very difficult to test, and then therefore to be able to scale anything new that might bring about a change. So I think that, you know, the real opportunity, and it's a great one, we're already seeing it in a really fantastic way, is that philanthropy is able to do that. And I think that, you know, when you think about the role that philanthropists can play as well as their advisors, is really in learning about educating themselves, but also being able to talk to the plethora of organisations that already work in this space, and to really find out, where you feel like you can have the greatest impact, and certainly being able to collaborate, work with organisations that help convene funds, so that you're investing in something where that the sum of your funds and the sum of other people's funds are worth a lot more and can be highly impactful. So I think that addressing some of those issues around the flexibility and about the long-term horizons that we need funding for are really interesting here.
Paddy, do you do long-term funding and unrestricted funding?
Oh, look at that. So just picking up on Rebecca and Sara. So absolutely, the key takeaway today for professional advisors is to ensure and encourage and then ensure that their clients do 3-year unrestricted funding. This is just as simple as that. And I don't need to explain why, because that's already been done by my colleagues today. I'd add a couple of other ones. You are being a grant giver here, so the clients are, and that due diligence process. There are some very good people doing that due diligence. So I would try to avoid duplication or inefficiencies of either trying to do it oneself when there are some very good grant giving organisations that you can give to, and they've done that work. That's all I'll say on that, and I'll come back on ESG in a second when you're ready.
No, go ahead.
ESG. So on the impact side, our view, and it's only one view, and I'm sure we're wrong, but we think that it's a very fast-moving environment at the moment. Slightly suspicious of it. I think that we just don't have the data, the empirics, to understand quite what necessarily the outcomes, and are they the best outcomes? Are they the best management teams, as I was suggesting before, to deliver those? So we worry about that. So we sideline it at the moment until there's a bit more clarity. On the ESG side, again, the professional advisor has got to counsel their clients about where, how far down that continuum do they want to play. So actually, is it just an exclusion list? So you're not going to do prostitution, drugs, arms, and whatever. And in which case, maybe you're avoiding those, but otherwise sweating your portfolio such that you have a maximum that you can then give. Which is slightly our model. We're a little bit, I hope, more sophisticated in that we do some ESG investment, and we do it because I think actually, it empirically will perform well. But again, it's sort of somewhat sweating the portfolio such that you then have an amount and you can maximize that giving, is how we do it. I'm sure it'll move in time, but this is quite a fast moving environment at the moment. So I'd counsel a bit of caution.
Sara, in terms of your investments, do you look at some of the areas that you're working on, like refugees, and try to use your investments in a way to help?
Yeah, all the time. Our main portfolio is aligned with a climate active fund, which is distinct from Divest Invest. We're not big enough for Divest Invest to be impactful because it's simply backfilled. So we are very active as shareholders. We have a whole Quaker heritage, so we don't invest in pooled funds unless we know exactly what's in them. So we have a totally segregated portfolio. And on our social investment side, we draw a distinction between impact investing, which is impact is about impact, but for above sea level financial return, and social investment and blended finance, where we have the power and the flexibility in philanthropic foundations to be more forgiving and evergreen and long term. So we do a little bit of all of that. And I think what's coming within the next 10-15 years will be a global accounting system. It's already started. I heard Ronnie Cohen talking about this only the other week, of systems, accounting systems for impact, that just like financial accounting systems are now globally regularized and a requirement across the whole of the corporate sector, that is coming. And many of the multinational corporations, when you do that exercise on their public benefit and their public damage, come out the wrong side of the line, and that's got to change. And when it is changing, there's multi-billions in impact investing globally now, and quite a lot of it in green economy. So it's a lot of moving parts. I really completely get where Paddy's coming from. That at the charity sector level and small social enterprise level, that is still very immature, and also it's extremely expensive to administer, because it's the due diligence is very high in relation to the monies involved. So I think it's quite sensible for a small family office not to be engaged in that. We are heavy duty promoters of it, so we're heavily duty involved in it.
So I think it's interesting. There's our event on Thursday is on mainstream finance into social enterprises. So we have Schroeder's represented with their new fund, and residents as an intermediary in the social investment area. So Thursday that'll start to address that issue as well. Okay,
Rebecca's trying to get in, John.
Sorry?
Rebecca is trying to get in.
Sorry, Rebecca, I was just about to ask you a question, so go ahead.
No, that's okay. I think one of the things I wanted to add on the impact investing side, coming from the perspective of an organization, is that in thinking about how these funds can be accepted, we need to think about how we're partnering with organizations like the IRC, who majority of our staff work in active conflict zones, where being able to effectively track outcomes is really quite expensive and really onerous. It can be done,
and it can be dangerous.
So we have to be realistic about what impact investing can do, and also ensure that we're kind of flexible enough to ensure that at the same time we're also deploying appropriate philanthropic funds where they are needed in order to be able to tackle some of the hardest to reach issues.
If I was in your shoes running a charity, well, I do run a charity though, I'm looking at this. I mean, it used to be really simple. You got government money, or you got some philanthropists support you. I'm simplifying this, and now you have the complexity of impact investing and a whole bunch of other issues to relate to, and not just in language but also activity. Okay, we only have 2 minutes left. Oh, Paddy, go ahead.
Yeah, so just one thing, I am different obviously from Sara in that we are a for-profit body. So, I've got, I have a different protocol that I'm investing to. One other thing I would say, just very briefly, the diversification bit, just as you've heard from Sara, lots of, she's got lots of different work streams, lots of different ways of doing it. I like something like, I'm going to slightly call out Human Rights Watch here. Human Rights Watch in 2020, they did 169 publications on refugee and the migrant rights issues, publications. So, within that, that you are going to get, and I know Rebecca's quite right, difficult to measure some of these things, but I think, I love that diversification. That you're throwing a lot of mud on the wall and some is going to stick. So go Human Rights Watch.
Okay, final words of wisdom, 30 seconds each. Who would like to start? Sara.
How did I know you were going to do that to me?
I'm
going to quote Dolly Parton. This is one of my absolute favourites, which is to work out what you're good at and then do it on purpose.
That's not from 9 to 5, is it?
No.
Thank you, Rebecca.
No, it's about herself.
Oh, okay, thank you, Rebecca.
I would say that I think that there's huge potential for the impact of philanthropic investment from high net worth individuals, and I think that it could really bring about a paradigm shift in this response, being pivotal in convening ideas and expertise and driving innovation and transformation within this space. So yeah, just encourage everyone to find out more, to talk to people and learn, and we'll get there together. So thanks for the time today.
Okay, thank you. Very complex. Paddy, last word to you.
It's a complex issue. So I would just use 3 words. Those professional advisors use 3 words: investigate, expose, change.
Excellent. It's a great way to end. Thank you. Oh, Sara.
Yes, because you bounced me. So just quickly to say that we deliver resources with we deliver other people's resources and help other people to do that. So if any of your advisors have people that are looking for a home to work their money alongside ours, we'd be pleased to talk to them.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Okay, so Sara, Rebecca, Paddy, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. It's a really complex area, and I'm really sorry we only have 30 minutes.
We only do brilliant.
That's why you're here, Paddy, of course.
Well, we've already had some feedback to say that it was an inspired talk, so that's great. So thank
if
you
you
very
could
much.
delete anything that doesn't say brilliant,
Yeah.
Excellent. Well done, you.
Paddy, we're going to leave that in, and it goes on YouTube tomorrow. And so you'll be ending with the concept of brilliant, and everyone will know where it comes from and how it applies. So thank you for that.
Nice to see everyone.
Sophia, you've got a word in edgewise, so we're not going to stop.
Well, I just want to let you all know, thank you all. That was brilliant. Thank you very much for your time. We are taking a break next week for the second bank holiday of May. But we are back on the 7th of June, where we'll be hearing from the next generation of professional advisors. The cat's off. And as John mentioned, we have an hour-long event this Thursday, 27th of May, with Resonance, looking at whether social investment is moving into mainstream investing. There is still time to register, so get in touch with me today if you'd like to. And thanks again for joining. Have a great week. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.